You're watching France 24. I'm François Picard. Welcome to a special edition of the France 24 debate on this Thursday, October the 20th, 2011. It was midday when words started filtering through, first claims of his capture, then of the death of Muammar Gaddafi. These are some of the latest images we've received courtesy of Libyan television, amateur video footage of a Gaddafi who at this point was still alive. The images all afternoon of his corpse making the rounds. This amateur footage, this coming 2 months after the fall of Tripoli, Gaddafi's hometown finally overrun for good by the National Transitional Council forces this Thursday, and of course this sparking eruptions of joy both in Sirte and in the capital. Today in the France 24 debate, a special edition devoted to the death of the man who ruled Libya for 42 years. We're going to go to Tripoli in a moment. We'll also be going to speak with John Marks from London, Associate Fellow at Chatham House and the Director of Cross-Border Information. For now, though, let's say hello to both Kamel Al-Marash, independent Libyan journalist. For a long time, you worked for the Libyan news agency, and Philip Stoner, the former UK defense attaché to Paris, who's been helping us understand the NATO side of things throughout to this conflict, a conflict which dates back, let's not forget, to February. Now, you've also been weighing in a lot on the conversation today. We'll be looking at some of your remarks on the France 24 debate Facebook page and on Twitter, our handle at François F24. Before we try to piece together what happened, Kamel Al-Marash, you were saying to us you were 12 years old in September of 1969 when Muammar Gaddafi came to power. Your thoughts 42 years later?
My thoughts is, after all, this dictatorship, this is a regime where all power is in one man's hands. The joie now is this is over now. I think the Gaddafi regime has ended the 20th of August, since a month ago. But today it's marking the end of this regime physically by the death of Gaddafi. I think it is a historical moment for all Libyans. And I have telephoned today many people in Tripoli, and they expressed a lot of joy and a lot of happiness of this end, because every Libyan think if Gaddafi is alive, Libya will have no stability.
Still a moment of doubt.
Still a moment of doubt.
We can go to Tripoli now, and Anas El Gamadi, director of the SADC Institute, a think tank that advises the National Transitional Council. Anas, when the conflict began, you were here in the studio in Paris. Now you're back in Tripoli. Until a month ago, Muammar Gaddafi was the only head of state that you had ever known.
Sorry, can you just repeat the last question? Sorry, I'm having a few problems with the
audio. I was saying, until a month ago, Muammar Gaddafi was the only head of state you had ever known. What were your thoughts today?
It's honestly, it leaves you speechless. I woke up to friends calling me saying they've caught him. It was just a delirious nature I never thought I would see today. From Feb 17, we were just convinced, and everyone was so convinced here that this would, that it would come to this kind of culmination, that we would have our victory, but you could never describe it in words. It's literally I've been feeling nauseous all day. I mean, every time the minute I heard it on the phone, I just couldn't believe it. So, and now having seen the photos, it's incredible. life without Gaddafi has been, will be something new for not only myself, but my father's generation, even my grandfather's generation. So, it's something huge.
John Marks joins us now from London. John, I remember on the eve of the NATO airstrikes, you were with us at the time. There's been thousands of casualties since. Did you imagine it would end like this? All right, we're having trouble getting
I think
through.
the actual way that the
Go ahead, John.
conflict would end was difficult to call, but I think it was always very clear that the end of the conflict would hinge on the end of Gaddafi and what happened to the Libyan leader, because he was central to politics in Libya. So, yes, I think the regime being whittled away and whittled away. Of course, when we talked on the eve of the NATO strikes, it was very difficult to know whether there was going to be enough firepower on the rebel side. But when NATO came in, once they had the no-fly zone, which after all had its military
it tipped the
implications,
balance. John, I'm going to interrupt you for
really
just
the
one
writing
second
was on the
because
wall for the Gaddafi
I'm
regime.
going to interrupt you
And
for
we've
just
reached
one
this point
second
we
because
want
we're going to go to someone whose day began in Sirte. Correspondent Marine Olivesi is now in Misrata. You can give us perhaps the latest. There's still a lot of sketchy information on how Colonel Gaddafi was captured and also on the whereabouts, or the fate rather, of two of his sons.
Hello?
Yeah, Marine, can you hear us? Can you?
Yes. Hi. Yes, I can hear you fine. I'm at the main hospital in Misrata where people are still waiting for the body of Muammar Gaddafi. It's still unknown whether he's been actually taken to Misrata and where. There's been several rumors about him being at his body being at a mosque and then at a souk and then at the hospital. And every time we go there to check, but we haven't been able to confirm so far that his body is in Misrata tonight.
Any news about his two sons?
No, the latest I heard was Saif apparently was in a convoy that the NCC troops was trying to attack on the road out of Sirte, and Mu'tasim was believed to be dead, but those informations again I can't confirm.
All right, I want to thank you for that. Marine Olivesi, in the thick of things in Misrata. Let me go back to John Marks there for a second. We'll try to go back to John Marks in a moment. Still sorting out a few little technical snafus there. Philip Stoner, the NATO says its warplanes did fire on a convoy around 8:30 a.m. local time near Sirte. They cannot confirm if they're the ones that struck Colonel Gaddafi's forces. We've sort of forgotten that NATO is still active in Libya.
You say that. I mean, I think it's been quite clear that during the sort of build-up on Bani Walid and also the build-up on Sirte, NATO has been in the background. And of course, NATO has had to do this rather sort of, I would say, sort of difficult to role of some ways of always being there, some ways being present, in making sure that they struck at the right time, they minimised the civilian casualties when they did strike, but being there in a way such as to make sure that as and when there was a requirement for that sort of firepower, it was available, all based on the fact that clearly it was protecting civilians in Libya, and that was the basis for the NATO intervention. How they got involved with, first of all, finding out that this convoy was trying to get out, who it contained, who was inside, we will find out in due course. It wouldn't surprise me if they had some sort of signals intelligence to indicate that they probably knew who might well be in that convoy. It looked rather suspicious, and they probably were in a situation to perhaps deal with it with the helicopters that they had available, the Apache helicopters.
All right, we can show you images from what Libyan state television says was Muammar Gaddafi's hideout in Sirte. And you'll see it's quite summary, those images that we're about to show you right now, from what is purported to be the hideout of Muammar Gaddafi. And the question I have for you, John Marks, we started broaching it before we had to go there to Misrata. Muammar Gaddafi popping up in Sirte. There'd been all kinds of speculation as to his whereabouts. Were you fairly convinced that that's where he was?
No, I actually thought he was going to be down south, possibly even looking for a defensive position around Chad, or else there were reports that he was in the Radames Basin up in the southwest, near the border with Algeria. There was the element of Chadian tribes, black Libyan groups, various people that Gaddafi had been playing with. So, in fact, I was quite surprised that he himself was in Sirte. I assume that what they were thinking, if Mutassim was there, if Saif was there, that they could actually keep Gaddafi's, essentially his hometown, as a sort of enclave where they'd be independent. And that would help to explain why the fighting in Sirte has been as fierce as it has been. Clearly that analysts who were wondering where Gaddafi was, like Gaddafi himself, miscalculated on where he was and how secure he could be in the position he found himself.
And once again, correspondent Marino Olivesi saying we don't have confirmation as to the fate of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi and Motassim Gaddafi. John Marks, explain, why are those two sons of Gaddafi so important?
Well, of all Gaddafi's children, who'd become really the linchpin of a strange regime that had gone out of being Gaddafi's earlier revolutionary regime into more of a corporate business. Each of the Gaddafi children had these charitable foundations that were like big businesses. They actually had stakes in companies. They had stakes in policy, even though, like their father, they didn't have a formal role in this very strange Jamahiriya political system. Now, Saif al-Islam was seen as the radical, more Western-oriented. He wasn't a genius, but he's quite an approachable, presentable young man, and he was seen as Libya liberalised and became much closer to the West after the Lockerbie and other episodes were overcome in the middle of the last decade. Saif was seen as his successor, but there were rivals within the family, and probably the strongest rival of recent years was Mutassim, who was head of his father's private bodyguard. He had a stronger following than Saif in the military. So if there was going to be Libya as a family business, with Muammar Gaddafi at the head, as he always was, but with his sons coming up, then Saif and Mutassim were the most important. And clearly, if there's going to be a rump resistance after Gaddafi, which quite frankly I doubt that would be very strong, then it would come with one or two of these sons as the figureheads.
And we're just getting in the information minister of the National Transitional Council telling the Reuters news agency that Colonel Gaddafi's son Motassim is dead, but that is not confirmed from an independent source for the time being. Now, it's been 2 months since the fall of Tripoli. Remember, it was 8 months after the fall of Baghdad that U.S. forces captured Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein's subsequent trial and hanging did not win hearts and minds in the Middle East. Kamel Al-Marash, were you apprehensive at the prospect of Gaddafi being caught alive? Let's talk honestly here.
Well, let's talk honestly. Captain Gaddafi alive will allow to get him trialed of all crimes he committed in Libya. But that really put another problem. Who is going to trial him and how? And, there will be a lot of problem in trialing Gaddafi. So, personally, I think his destiny, which he has chosen himself like this, yes, I think it is a tragic destiny, but it is good for Libya, and it's good for him as well. Now we can turn the page in Libya, and we can begin with a new Libya. But with Gaddafi still alive, Mem alive, in facing his crimes would be very difficult for Libya.
Anas El Gamadi, would it have been a big problem having Colonel Gaddafi under arrest in Libya? Would it have helped to keep the doubt that Kamel is talking about?
I think there would have been issues, obviously, but overall, I think it would have been good for a psychological sense of justice to have him hear from the people what he's done and how he's affected people. It would have been an incredible sense of justice. I don't think I don't think everyone was there with a sense of, blood in their teeth or on their tongues waiting for more. I think people are genuinely interested in bringing these people to justice. And I mean, if the way he was shot and if the way that he was dragged out of his car is just for some, then perhaps it's not just for all. I don't think anyone is crying at the fact. But I know if people had chosen the way they could have got him, I would have liked to have seen them put on trial, perhaps in a Libyan jail. I myself personally would have liked to have seen him go to The Hague. Unfortunately, Saddam didn't get to go to The Hague, and had he gone there, perhaps we would have had some more audio during his trial and could have heard what he had to say and exactly who kept him in power and those that have been around him and those in the international community that have their blood, their fair share of blood in their hand. And someone like Gaddafi has not only 42 years of tyranny on his hand, but 42 years of secrets and 42 years of dirty deals. And this could have been an excellent way of really pursuing, especially in the context of a post-WikiLeaks world, this could have been an excellent way of really ushering in a new age of understanding in modern tyranny and justice and values such as those.
Philip Stoner, we mentioned the parallel with Saddam Hussein, but if it turns out that it was indeed that NATO convoy that took him out, will there then be parallels with the killing of Osama bin Laden taken out by foreign forces?
Well, I think so, but not that much, because when you look at what happened with Osama bin Laden, it was a completely different affair. The Americans said that, we are going to get you, and they worked it out, and through basically hook or by crook, they did it, and they did it on their own in a remarkable way, and they in fact disposed of the remains as well, which is actually another question which people might be asking: what do we do with the body of Gaddafi now, just to avoid all sorts of issues which might follow on? So I think that's something that a lot of people, I think, in Libya should be asking themselves. So it's not exactly the same. The Americans actually dealt with it in their own way. You might agree with it, you might not agree with it, but it was dealt with. This is not quite over yet.
John Marks, earlier you heard our correspondent Marine Olivesi saying, she's been doing the rounds of the morgues in Misrata. She hasn't seen the body yet. Finding that wise, it's again picking up on what Philip Stoner just said. What do you think is going to happen now?
I suppose there's going to have to be a burial. Gaddafi was still a major figure, but it's a difficult one to speculate on. I think the question of whether there was going to be a trial, it is very pertinent, putting up the picture of Saddam Hussein, because as Anas said, it would have been good to see Gaddafi go perhaps to the international court, just as Saddam didn't go. But the way that Saddam died, and other episodes as well, think of Slobodan Milosevic and the way that his protracted defence in the court kept Serbia looking backwards for a very long time and confused the issue. Possibly we are looking at a stage where, bloody and brutal, actually this ending can allow Libya to move on, because certainly it's now got to go quite quickly through a number of political transitions that are going to pose big questions, and possibly if the country just spent too much time now looking back at Gaddafi or reflecting on things through his trial, that could add to complications. Difficult situation.
Let me get Philip Stoner to pick up on this. There's been a lot of criticism of late of the U.S. administration with drones killing people in places like Pakistan and Yemen. When you think back to the period when the Slobodan Milosevic trial dragged on without a proper outcome, since he died in jail before he could come to trial, the former Yugoslav president, are we entering a new phase of sort of summary justice, perhaps?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think certainly the heat of the moment, those involved, the rebel fighters, now the Libyan fighters, we should say, clearly something had to give at one particular point. And just like you, I was waiting for the last few weeks for something to happen in Sirte. So I think something had to give. Gaddafi thought he perhaps was in a position where he could sort of, resist, but he was clearly determined to go down fighting and die on the field of battle, which he did. I don't think so, and I think certainly as far as the Americans, and we talked about Saddam Hussein, but also the Bin Laden thing, the idea of summary justice, and I don't think that really is relevant in this particular case. The issue of Bin Laden, the Americans saw him as a threat. In this case, Gaddafi, the fact he was still there, it was very much a case for the fighters, for the TNC to deal with him, and despite perhaps getting a bit of assistance from NATO forces, that will all come out later, it was nevertheless the TNC forces who dealt with Gaddafi, and I think that's a very important point. And they felt that under the circumstances, this was the only way to do it.
And how they dispose of the body, as you point out, will also be
well. I think
key.
that's going to be an interesting one because I think it was the future king of Libya was not allowed to be buried actually in Libya, and so there is an issue about this and what you do with the remains of somebody. For example, Hitler. The remains of Hitler don't exist.
Kamel Al-Marash, should he be allowed a proper burial?
Well, I think it was a big problem for the TNC, really, because even if they decide to bury him in Libya, then where exactly? Would it be in his native city? Would it be in another place? Would it be in another place, unknown place? That's the big question.
Anas El Gamadi, what would you like to see happen?
Well, our teacher, the Libyan warrior Omar Mukhtar, when in response to the had to fight the Italians, would always say they're not our teachers. And I think that's the kind of the power of that phrase is something that's very relevant for us today. And that we've fought Gaddafi as Libyan people and that we've been victorious. But in terms of justice, they're not our teachers. And I think that in order to maintain a sense of humanity, I think we have to bury him in Libya. It doesn't have to be in perhaps a marked grave or a big hoo-ha or furrow around where his grave will be. We have to bury humans in a dignified manner, and I don't think we throw out 2,000 years of civilization over one man. I think that would be the biggest mistake to do. Just destroy and turn away all of our lessons in humanity for that reason.
All right, so bury him in Libya, says Anas El Gamadi. France's president, by the way, hails a new era for the Libyan people, echoing the words of the British Prime Minister earlier in the day.
I think today is a day to remember all of Colonel Gaddafi's victims, from those who died in connection with the Pan Am flight over Lockerbie, to Yvonne Fletcher in a London street, and obviously all the victims of IRA terrorism who died through their use of Libyan Semtex. We should also remember the many, many Libyans who died at the hands of this brutal dictator and his regime.
And we've been getting reactions from you, the viewers, on Facebook. Dharma from Paul Louis in Mauritius. An American lady who was my friend was on the UTA plane that Gaddafi and his terrorists blew up over Africa. Gaddafi will be remembered for his twisted actions and two-faced political games that cost the lives of so many. While Ibrahima from Douala says the list of potentially indictables remains long. Who is next? Overall, and it's interesting, not much sympathy for Muammar Gaddafi, even among people who are not inside of Libya. 42 years in power, Muammar Gaddafi taking over thanks to a CIA-backed coup. John Marks, when did he start, at what point in his life did Muammar Gaddafi start to ratchet up the rhetoric, if you will, the nationalist, anti-West rhetoric?
Well, I think Gaddafi's coup was always a really quite strong nationalist rhetoric. I mean, there was the initial ambition. There was the fact that Libya had to change. It was a time of army officers. I mean, remember, we see the smiling Gaddafi here. And one of the most evocative photos I've seen today from the archive was Gaddafi laughing and joking with Gamal Abdel Nasser. You know, he was Nasser's disciple. You then had you'd had in 1967, 2 years before Gaddafi took over, the Six-Day War. That had huge resonance. 1973, Yom Kippur War. So you had the Middle East conflict. But Gaddafi really was an amazing loose cannon. I mean, he had this extreme commitment to Arab unity, to the Middle East, but the Arabs essentially, quite a long time ago, turned their backs on him. And why not? Because this man was a games player. And it was very interesting in your the contributions that came in just before, the person in Mauritius remembering the women on the UTA flight, David Cameron having resonance for people in this country about the IRA bombs where the explosives had come from Libya. Gaddafi was at all times playing games, and right to the end with this great Gaddafi the African thought, which is why I thought, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that he may have gone down south. You know, he was making coups. One leading African head of state once turned around to Gaddafi and said, well, couldn't you really stop interfering and causing so much trouble? And Gaddafi said, well, I don't really cause that much trouble. And the head of state said, well, actually, we went and we did a calculation, and it seems that you've been involved in 17 coups d'etat. And Gaddafi turned around and said, what, as many as that? You know, this was Muammar Gaddafi, and that's why when it comes to his death, he was a figure. He's been in our imaginations. Again, as Anas said, you know, for Libyans, their fathers, grandfathers, whole generations, Gaddafi's been around, and also for the world and world politics. But he's been a maverick, and his family, and particularly himself, his security services, hurt a lot of people, and I guess that's going to be the pervading memory.
Kamel Al-Marash, what was it like working for the official state news agency in Libya, where you've got this country where information is kept on a tight lid, yet you have, as John Marks was saying, this sort of loose cannon, a guy who, when he'd get up at conferences without any script and just sort of talk. How is it working for
Really, we were not working as a news agency as all other agencies. Personally, I worked with them as translator. We translate all the newspapers, the French newspapers, and we send them to Libya. And also we received the news from, the Jana news in Libya, which almost the activity of Gaddafi, and we translate them in French language and we send them back. That's all. We are prohibited even to go to conferences and to put questions. Because Gaddafi
how did diplomats handle his sort of freewheeling style?
Even diplomats, they are not really diplomats. And if Gaddafi wants something from Paris or from London, he will send a special, a special convoy for that. He would not depend on the ambassador of this country to transmit whatsoever he would like to go through to others. We know that there's some personality very, very near to Gaddafi who is taking this sort of missions, in Europe or in the Arab countries. He never believes in diplomacy, international diplomacy. And, the official agency works like a translator, or, some officials work for Gaddafi himself, and what he talks and what he did, and we describe them to the world. It's not dealing with news as a news agency as the other news in the world.
And I'm looking at the French news agency AFP, quoting a minister as saying it was French planes that stopped the Gaddafi convoy. Again, no confirmation of that.